Kindness is like a ripple in a still pond. It starts small but grows, touching lives in ways you'd never expect. Today, we begin a story that may just change the way you see the world. Elena Cruz and her little brother Mateo were two ordinary kids living in a quiet town. Their days were filled with laughter, sibling squabbles, and games under the sprawling mango tree in their backyard. But one sweltering summer afternoon, something extraordinary happened that would alter their lives forever. It was the kind of day when the heat presses down, making the world feel slower. Elena and Mateo were playing their favorite game, tag, under the shade of the mango tree. Mateo darted behind the trunk, his laughter echoing, when suddenly he stopped. His head tilted, his brows furrowed. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Elena paused, her heart skipping a beat. And then she heard it too, a faint, desperate chirp, barely audible over the hum of summer. It was a sound that carried more than just noise. It carried a plea, a cry so fragile it felt like it could shatter in the thick air. The camera pans to the ground, where sunlight filters through the leaves, highlighting a tiny bird crumpled beneath the tree. There, beneath the towering branches, they found her. A baby bird, no bigger than Mateo's cupped hands, lay trembling on the ground. Her wing jutted out at a strange angle, her tiny body quivering with fear. She seemed like she belonged to the earth more than the sky, a fallen star struggling to find its light again. "She's hurt," Elena whispered, her voice tight with worry. Mateo knelt down, his small hands hovering over the fragile creature. "Can we help her?" he asked, his voice breaking in a way Elena had never heard before. Their mother's words echoed in Elena's mind: when something needs your help, you help, even if it's small. She swallowed hard and nodded. "We can't just leave her." Carefully, as if holding a piece of glass that could shatter with the slightest pressure, Mateo cupped the bird in his hands. She was impossibly light, like holding the weight of a whisper. "She's so warm," he murmured, his eyes wide with wonder. Together, they carried her inside, their steps careful and deliberate, as if they were carrying the weight of the world. They didn't know it yet, but that tiny bird, fragile and broken, was about to teach them a lesson they'd carry for the rest of their lives. Sometimes, hope begins with the simplest of gestures. For Elena and Mateo, it started with an old shoebox, a piece of cloth, and the determination to save a life no bigger than the palm of a hand. The bird, now named Sol, because Elena said her soft feathers reminded her of the golden rays of the sun, became their shared mission. From that moment on, everything they did revolved around her survival. Mateo, with his small but steady hands, used a drinking straw to drop bits of water onto her tiny beak. He watched her intently, waiting for the smallest sign that she would drink, and when she finally did, it was as if the entire world exhaled with relief. Elena became Sol's storyteller. Every afternoon, she would sit beside the box, weaving tales about the sky, the clouds, and the freedom that Sol would one day feel again. "You'll fly so high," she whispered one day. "You'll feel the wind beneath your wings. And when you do, remember us, okay?" Each day brought small victories. Sol's chirps grew stronger, and her once limp wing began to twitch with tiny movements. Mateo would cheer whenever she took another sip of water or pecked at a softened piece of bread. It was as if they were nursing not just a bird, but a flicker of hope they didn't realize they needed. At night, Elena would check on Sol before going to bed, her heart pounding until she saw the faint rise and fall of the bird's chest. She didn't know why, but it mattered so much. It was as if keeping Sol alive meant proving that even the smallest, most fragile things deserved a chance to heal. For Mateo, caring for Sol wasn't just a task. It became a ritual, something sacred. Every morning, he'd rush to the box before anything else, whispering, "Good morning, Sol," as if the bird could understand. And maybe, in some unspoken way, she did. Day by day, Sol grew stronger. Her chirps turned into songs, and her movements became more deliberate. But with each small victory came a quiet realization. A day would come when she wouldn't need them anymore. And that day was approaching faster than they wanted to admit. Some moments in life are heavy, even when they are beautiful. They're moments where you know something precious is slipping through your fingers, and no matter how hard you try to hold on, you know it's time to let go. Sol had grown so strong, her wings now fluttering with a confidence that Elena and Mateo hadn't seen before. The bird they had nursed back to life was no longer fragile and helpless. She was ready to fly. But as the moment drew closer, something inside Elena twisted. It was a feeling she couldn't name, fear, perhaps, or love. But it was real. Letting go of Sol felt like letting go of a part of themselves. "Do you think she'll remember us?" Matteo asked, his voice cracking slightly as he held Sol up, just inches from the sky. Elena took a deep breath, brushing away a tear that had snuck up on her. She smiled at Matteo, though it wasn't easy. Maybe she won't, but we'll always remember her. It was a promise more than a statement. And then, Sol did what she was born to do. With a flick of her wings, she took off, lifting into the air as if the wind had been waiting for her. For a split second, she hovered, unsure whether to fly or return to the safety they had provided. But then, with one powerful beat of her wings, she shot into the sky. And as they watched her disappear into the horizon, Elena felt something inside her release, a quiet understanding that they had done what they were meant to do. They had given Sol the freedom she needed, and in return, they had learned what it meant to love something enough to let it go. Matteo stood there, his eyes fixed on the sky, searching for any sign of Sol's return, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. In that moment, they both knew that the bird wasn't just a creature they had saved. She had, in turn, saved them. Letting go wasn't easy, but sometimes it's the hardest part of love, giving someone or something the freedom to soar, and in doing so you realize that you've given yourself the same gift. Time moves on, as it always does, sweeping us into the next moment before we're ready. For Elena and Matteo, life continued with the same rhythm, but something inside them had shifted. It wasn't the same without Sol. The mornings didn't feel quite as bright, the air wasn't as full of possibility. In the days that followed, the yard seemed emptier. They would often find themselves standing by the mango tree, eyes scanning the sky, half expecting Sol to come back. Matteo would leave crumbs on the porch, just in case she remembered. It was a small hope, but it was all they had left of her. Elena had always been the dreamer, the one who believed in the impossible. But even she couldn't deny the weight of loss that lingered in the air. Sol had taken a part of their hearts with her when she flew away. And yet, Elena knew deep down that letting go was never truly the end. It was just another beginning. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Matteo looked up at the mango tree. It had been weeks since they had seen Sol, but in his heart, he couldn't let go of the belief that she'd return. "Maybe, just maybe, she'll come back someday," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to the wind itself. Elena glanced over at him, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Maybe she will," she replied softly, though her heart wasn't so sure. But time, as it often does, began to fill the empty spaces. Elena and Matteo found joy in other things. School projects, soccer games, family barbecues, they helped to push the memory of Sol to the back of their minds. But it was never truly gone. It was always there, like an unspoken promise that they couldn't quite forget. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Elena and Matteo had moved on, but their hearts still carried the soft echo of Sol's flight. It had been almost a year since they had let her go, and they had learned to live without her. Yet fate has its own timing, and sometimes the things we let go of come back in the most unexpected ways. That morning, the world seemed unchanged, until they heard it. The same faint chirp they had once heard from beneath the mango tree. It was distant, barely perceptible at first, but there was no mistaking the sound. The same chirp that had haunted them so many months ago. Only this time, it wasn't desperate. It was joyful, full of life. The siblings froze, their hearts racing. Elena turned to Matteo, her eyes wide with disbelief. Could it be? Before Matteo could answer, they both heard it again. Louder now, closer. And then, without warning, a small flock of birds appeared, soaring gracefully over the fence and landing in their backyard. Their wings spread wide, their feathers glistening in the sunlight. But one bird, the smallest one, landed softly on the branch of the mango tree, her bright eyes locking with Elena's. Sol. It was her. There was no mistaking it. Elena and Matteo stood in stunned silence, their hearts pounding in their chests as they watched the bird who had once been so fragile and small, now perched confidently in front of them. Sol had returned, but not alone. She was with her flock, her family, and she had come back to the place where it all began. Matteo's voice barely escaped, filled with awe. She came back. It wasn't a question, but a statement filled with wonder. Elena, her eyes wide with disbelief, couldn't take her eyes off Sol. She had thought it was impossible. After all, birds don't come back, do they? But here she was, in all her glory, a testament to resilience, to the unexpected twists that life sometimes throws our way. But there was something even more magical in the air than just Sol's return. It was the sense of connection, the unspoken bond that had always been there between them and her, between the earth and the sky. Sol had come back not just because she remembered them, but because she had something to offer. And the story was only just beginning. Sometimes the gifts we receive aren't wrapped in paper or ribbons, but in actions that speak louder than any words ever could. Sol, having returned to the place that once gave her refuge, didn't come back empty-handed. No, she brought with her something far more valuable than they could ever have imagined. For the next few days, the birds began to visit them regularly. At first, it was just Sol, hopping from branch to branch, occasionally perching near the window or on the fence, watching them with a steady gaze. But slowly, her flock began to follow her, a beautiful array of birds of all sizes and colors. They would land on the fence, in the trees, even on the roof of the house, each time keeping their eyes fixed on the siblings. And then, one morning, as Elena stood by the window watching them, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, brightly colored feather resting on the windowsill. It was vibrant, almost glowing in the early light. She reached out to touch it, and in that moment a thought crossed her mind. Could it be a gift? Later that day, Mateo stepped outside with a hesitant smile, holding a small handful of sunflower seeds. He had seen Sol watching him from the fence earlier, her head cocked as if waiting for something. With a quiet but hopeful voice, he called out, "I brought you something." To his surprise, one of the birds from the flock flew down, landing on the ground in front of him. It eyed the seeds for a moment, then, almost as if deciding that they were acceptable, pecked gently at them. Mateo's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just Sol anymore. It was all of them, acknowledging him, showing their trust. Each day, the birds left little gifts, feathers, leaves, and small trinkets, near the yard or on the windowsill. It was their way of saying thank you for the kindness, the compassion they had been shown. Elena and Mateo began to understand that the birds weren't just returning for the food or shelter, they were returning to offer gratitude. They had become more than just creatures of the wild. They had become a symbol of the connection that transcended the simple act of rescuing a fragile life. Some gifts aren't tangible. Some gifts don't arrive wrapped in shiny paper or a brightly colored bow. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can receive is the return of something we had lost, something deep inside of us that we didn't even know was missing until it came back. For Elena and Mateo, the return of Sol and her flock had brought more than just joy. It had returned something precious they hadn't realized they were missing, a renewed sense of hope, a belief in the kindness of the world, and a reminder that life had a way of bringing things full circle, no matter how broken or lost they seemed. Every evening, as the sun began to set, Elena would sit on the porch, watching the birds as they soared into the sky. She didn't feel sadness anymore, only peace. It was as if Sol's return had completed a cycle, and now she was free. Free to fly, free to live, and free to love. But what truly touched Elena's heart was that Sol had come back to them, not just as a bird they had saved, but as a symbol of the love and care they had given. Sol had been their gift. Yes. But in the end, it was Elena and Mateo who had received the true blessing. They had been reminded of the beauty of life, the importance of love, and the power of giving without expecting anything in return. Mateo often sat beside Elena during those evening moments. In silence, they shared something unspoken, a shared understanding of how far they had come. They had both learned that love wasn't just about keeping something close to you. It was about allowing it to grow, to spread its wings and soar. "She came back," Mateo whispered one evening, his voice filled with wonder and gratitude. "But not because we expected her to. She came back because she knew we loved her." Elena didn't respond at first, but her heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of love. Love not only for Sol, but for her brother, for their family, for the simple yet profound connection they had all shared. It was a love that had grown beyond the confines of the backyard, beyond the fences and walls of their home. It had reached the sky, and it had brought them back together in ways words couldn't express. In the end, Elena and Matteo learned that the love they gave to Sol was never one-sided. It was a gift that had been returned to them in ways they had. As time passed, the world around Elena and Matteo continued to shift, just as it always does. But in the wake of Sol's return, something had changed in the siblings too. It wasn't just the backyard that had flourished. They had, in their own way, begun to bloom again, their hearts opening to the beauty of the world around them. The seasons had come and gone since Sol's return, and with them the quiet certainty that life, in all its beautiful unpredictability, always has a way of bringing things full circle. Sol had come back, not as the fragile bird they had rescued, but as a part of something larger, something wild and free. Her flock had grown, and so had the love that had bloomed between the birds and the family. Matteo had come to see it clearly now. Sol wasn't just a symbol of something they had rescued, something that was once weak and fragile. No, she had become a part of their lives, a reminder that life had a rhythm, a cycle that moved beyond them. She was free now, truly free, and in her freedom, she had given them the most important gift of all, the ability to see the world through new eyes. "Look at her," Matteo said, his voice quiet but filled with awe. "She's not just a bird, she's a part of us. She always will be." Elena nodded, her heart full, "And we're a part of her." The words hung in the air, full of meaning and truth. Sol had returned, not because they needed her, but because they had given her the chance to be who she was always meant to be. And in turn, Sol had taught them something they would carry with them forever. That love, true love, isn't about possession or control. It's about freedom, respect, and the willingness to let go, to allow others to find their own way while knowing that, in the end, love remains. And so as the seasons changed and time moved forward, Elena and Matteo found peace. They had learned, over the course of a year, what it truly meant to love, to give, to let go, and to understand that the things we love, the ones we care for, will always find their way back to us in one way or another. In the end, it wasn't just Sol who had come full circle. It was all of them. Their love had come back to them, stronger and more beautiful than they could have ever imagined. And the lesson, as it always is, was simple but profound. Love, in its truest form, is boundless. There comes a time when every story, no matter how beautiful, reaches its final chapter. And sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing when to let go. As the seasons had passed and Sol's wings had grown strong, so too had the bond between the siblings and their feathered friend. But the time was coming when Sol would need to fly on her own, without looking back, to find her place in the world once more. For Elena, it had been a bittersweet realization. She had known this day would come, but she hadn't been ready for it. Sol had given her so much more than she could ever express. She had given her hope, joy, and a renewed belief in the magic of the world. But now, Sol had become who she was always meant to be, a wild bird, flying free, unbound by the world they had built around her. Matteo stood beside Elena, his hand resting on her shoulder. There was no need for words. They both understood. Sol was leaving. But she wasn't leaving them. She was simply moving forward, just as they had done, just as life itself does. The love that had brought her to them wasn't something that could be contained. It was something that had to fly, something that had to grow beyond the walls of their backyard and into the world. Elena's voice broke the silence, quiet but firm. "She's ready, Matteo." It was a statement, not a question, a declaration of acceptance. In that moment, Elena realized something profound. Love wasn't just about keeping someone close. It was about allowing them the freedom to soar, to live fully in the way they were meant to. And in letting go, she had given Sol the most important gift of all, the gift of freedom. Cut to the siblings sitting together on the porch, a peaceful silence between them. There's no sadness, only a quiet understanding. They watch the sky, where the birds have now disappeared into the distance. Sol's final flight wasn't a goodbye. It was a celebration of everything she had become and everything they had shared. The bond they had built would never be broken, not by time, not by distance, and not by the sky that separated them. It was a bond that transcended the physical, the tangible. It was a bond of love that would live on in their hearts forever. Some stories don't end with a full stop. They end with a quiet pause, a space where the echo of love continues to reverberate long after the last page has turned. Elena and Matteo stood together, their hearts full, not of sorrow, but of something deeper, of gratitude, of peace, and of a love that, though no longer tangible, would never truly leave them. The days that followed Sol's departure were filled with quiet reflection. Elena and Matteo went about their lives, but the world around them felt different now, fuller, brighter. They had learned something that would stay with them forever, that love doesn't end just because someone leaves. It doesn't fade because time passes or distance grows. True love remains. It endures in the way we remember, in the way we live, and in the way we carry those we love with us, even when they're no longer physically present. Matteo looked over at Elena one evening, a soft smile on his face. "Do you think she's okay?" he asked quietly. There was no need for further explanation. They both knew the she he meant. Elena nodded, her eyes filled with a calm certainty. "She's free, Matteo. And that's all that matters." Some love stories aren't told through words. They're told through actions, through moments shared, through silences and glances. And though Sol had flown away, the love that had brought them together was as strong as ever. Elena and Matteo had given Sol the gift of freedom, and in doing so, they had discovered that true love is not something we hold on to, it's something we set free. And as they watched the sky, they knew that their love for Sol would never fade, never diminish. It would live on in every sunset, every breeze, every quiet moment shared between them, a love that lives on even after the final flight. Because love, like the wind, is free. And when you let it go, it will always find its way back to you.